I'm Annie, 28 years old, and my fiancé just brought his French mother to meet me. She was absolutely charming in English, but when she switched to French with him, she said something that made my blood freeze. This dumb rich girl is perfect. You'll marry her for the green card, then get rid of her for the inheritance. They both laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. They had no idea I understood every single word. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this moment sitting at Le Bernardin, the most expensive restaurant in the city, listening to my future mother-in-law plot my financial ruin in a language she thought I couldn't understand. 6 months ago, I was on top of the world. I'd just gotten engaged to Jean-Baptiste, this incredibly charming French guy I met at work. He was everything I thought I wanted. Sophisticated, cultured, and head over heels in love with me. Or so I believed. The proposal was straight out of a fairy tale. He took me to Central Park during the first snow of winter, got down on one knee right by the Bethesda fountain, and asked me to be his wife in that sexy French accent that made my knees weak. I said yes without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? We'd been dating for 18 months, he'd integrated seamlessly into my life, and my friends adored him. Plus, I'd been dreaming of a wedding where I could surprise him by saying my vows in French. So romantic, right? I'd been secretly taking lessons twice a week with this amazing tutor named Marie. The irony wasn't lost on me now, sitting across from Isabelle Dubois, his mother, who'd flown in from Lyon specifically to meet the American girl her son was planning to marry. She'd been nothing but gracious all evening, complimenting my dress, asking about my work in marketing, and expressing how excited she was about the wedding. But when the wine arrived, and she thought the ambient noise would cover their conversation, everything changed. Elle est parfaite pour notre plan, she'd whispered to Jean-Baptiste. She's perfect for our plan. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth as I forced myself to keep chewing, to keep smiling, to keep playing the role of the clueless American girlfriend. Oui, maman. Elle ne soupçonne rien. Yes, mom. She suspects nothing. That's when she delivered the line that shattered my world. The one about the green card and the inheritance. Turns out, dear Jean-Baptiste had done his homework. He knew about the trust fund I'd inherited from my grandmother, the one that had made me financially comfortable at 28. He knew about my family's real estate investments, the portfolio I'd built through careful planning and smart decisions. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing to surprise him with fluent French on our wedding day. 5 months of intensive lessons had given me more than basic conversational skills. I understood every calculated word they exchanged about their timeline, their strategy, their complete and utter contempt for the stupid American, who was about to hand them everything on a silver platter. The waiter approached to refill our wine glasses, and Isabelle seamlessly switched back to English, her voice warm and maternal. Annie, darling, I simply must tell you how perfectly you compliment Jean-Baptiste. You're exactly what he needs. If only she knew how right she was about to be. But what I did next changed everything. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, I learned early that money doesn't buy you love, but it sure attracts a lot of interesting people. My parents died in a car accident when I was 22, leaving me with a substantial inheritance and a hard-learned lesson about who to trust. Apparently, I hadn't learned it well enough. Jean-Baptiste had appeared in my life at the perfect moment. I'd just ended a relationship with a guy who turned out to be more interested in my investment portfolio than my personality. I was gun-shy, cautious, and determined to find someone who wanted me for me, not my bank account. Enter JB, as he liked to be called, with his effortless charm and apparent disinterest in my financial situation. He worked in international consulting, made good money, and always insisted on splitting checks. He drove a modest sedan, lived in a decent but not luxurious apartment, and never once asked about my family's wealth. I was completely smitten. Here was this sophisticated European man who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my dreams, my terrible jokes about spreadsheets. He'd moved to New York 3 years earlier for work, and his visa situation seemed stable. Never once did he mention needing help with immigration status. Our first date was at a small French cafe in Soho. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. He ordered in French, translated the menu for me with patient humor, and told me stories about growing up in Lyon. His mother was a retired schoolteacher. His father had passed away when he was young, and he spoke about family with such genuine warmth that it made my heart ache for what I'd lost. Family is everything, he'd said that night, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Without them, we are just floating through life without anchor. I should have paid more attention to those words. Family was indeed everything to Jean-Baptiste, just not in the way I thought. The relationship progressed naturally. He met my friends. I met his colleague circle. We spent weekends exploring the city, cooking together in my kitchen, talking about books and travel and the future. He was patient with my trust issues, understanding about my occasional emotional walls, and incredibly supportive when I struggled with missing my parents. 3 months in, he mentioned that his mother was eager to meet me, but understood that international travel was expensive and complicated. Such a thoughtful son, making sure I didn't feel pressured to fly to France before I was ready. How considerate of him to be so understanding about money. By month 6, we were talking about moving in together. By month 12, marriage felt inevitable. When he proposed, I was ready to say yes before he finished asking the question. This was my person, my forever, my happily ever after. That's when I decided to surprise him with French lessons. I wanted to honor his heritage, show him how much his culture meant to me, prove that I was worthy of joining his family. The classes were challenging but exhilarating. Marie, my tutor, was impressed with my progress and enthusiasm. "You have natural ear for language," she'd tell me. "Your accent is quite good for American. Jean-Baptiste will be so surprised and pleased." I practiced conjugations while commuting to work, listened to French podcasts during lunch breaks, and watched French films with subtitles every weekend he was busy with work. I was so proud of my secret project, so excited for the moment when I'd reveal this romantic gesture. Planning the wedding had been a joy. We'd chosen a venue, selected a date 8 months out, and started the guest list. JB was so helpful with everything, particularly interested in the financial details. Which vendors required deposits, what the cancellation policies looked like, how the payments would be structured. "I want to contribute equally," he'd insisted. "This is our day, not just yours." Such a gentleman, so concerned with fairness and partnership. I was touched by his determination to pay half, even when I assured him my trust fund could easily cover the expenses. He'd seemed almost uncomfortable discussing my family's wealth, changing the subject whenever I brought up my inheritance or investment returns. Red flag number 1, though I didn't see it then. A man who's genuinely in love doesn't get uncomfortable when his fiancée mentions financial security. But I was too busy being grateful for his apparent lack of gold digger tendencies to question why he seemed so awkward about money conversations. Red flag number 2 came when he started asking detailed questions about my estate planning. Did I have a will? What happened to inherited assets after marriage? How did joint property work in New York? All perfectly reasonable questions for an engaged couple, right? I was so naive, so trusting, so completely unprepared for what was coming. That was my first mistake. The engagement period flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, dress fittings, and vendor meetings. Jean-Baptiste was the perfect fiancé, involved in every decision and endlessly supportive of my vision for our special day. He particularly loved hearing about the financial aspects, nodding thoughtfully when I explained how my grandmother's trust fund was structured and what it meant for our future security. "Your grandmère sounds like a remarkable woman," he'd say, stroking my hand, "to leave such legacy for her family. You must miss her very much." I did miss grandmère terribly. She'd been my anchor after my parents died, the one who taught me about financial responsibility and the importance of protecting what previous generations had built. Her trust fund wasn't just money, it was security, independence, and the freedom to make choices based on love rather than necessity. JB seemed to understand this on a deep level. He'd ask thoughtful questions about grandmère's life, her values, her hopes for the family legacy. Sometimes his curiosity felt almost academic, like he was studying for an exam, but I chalked it up to his genuine interest in becoming part of my family history. Meanwhile, my French lessons were progressing beautifully. Marie had moved me from basic conversational phrases to more complex grammar and cultural nuances. We practiced restaurant interactions, family conversations, and formal speech patterns that would impress his relatives at the wedding. "Your pronunciation of Lyon regional dialect is particularly good," Marie had mentioned during one lesson. "This will surprise Jean-Baptiste's family very much. They will be so proud to welcome you." I was counting down the days until I could reveal my surprise. Wedding planning had brought us closer than ever, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world to have found someone who appreciated both my ambition and my vulnerability. Then his mother announced her visit. "Maman finally has time to travel," JB told me over dinner at our favorite Italian place. "She's so excited to meet you properly, to see where we'll live after marriage, to understand American customs." I was nervous but thrilled. Meeting the mother was a huge step, and I wanted everything to be perfect. We planned an elaborate weekend itinerary: dinner at Le Bernardin, brunch in the West Village, a walking tour of Central Park, shopping on Fifth Avenue. I wanted to show Isabel that her son had chosen well, that I was worthy of joining their family. JB handled all the restaurant reservations, insisting he knew his mother's preferences better than I did. She appreciates fine dining but doesn't like too much fuss, he explained. Sophisticated but comfortable, you understand. The morning of her arrival, I spent hours getting ready. Hair professionally styled, makeup perfectly applied, wearing my most elegant dress with the sapphire earrings Grand-mère had left me. I wanted to make the right impression, to show respect for his family and culture. Isabelle Dubois turned out to be exactly as charming as JB had described. Petite and elegant with silver hair styled in a classic French twist, and eyes that missed nothing. Her English was excellent, spoken with just enough accent to be endearing rather than difficult to understand. "Annie, ma chérie," she'd said, embracing me warmly at the airport. "You are even more beautiful than Jean-Baptiste described. I can see why he is so completely smitten." She complimented everything. My apartment, my decorating taste, my choice of wine for our pre-dinner drinks. She asked intelligent questions about my work, my education, my family background. The conversation flowed naturally, and I found myself relaxing into what felt like a genuine connection. During our taxi ride to Le Bernardin, she held my hand and told me how happy she was to welcome me into their family. "Jean-Baptiste has always been particular about women," she confided. "I was beginning to worry he would never find someone worthy of his heart. But you, ma petite, you are perfect for him." Little did I know how literally she meant those words. The restaurant was everything I'd hoped. Elegant, romantic, with soft lighting and impeccable service. We were seated at a beautiful table with a view of the kitchen, where we could watch the culinary artistry in action. The sommelier recommended a gorgeous burgundy that paired perfectly with our seafood selections. For the first hour, everything was magical. Isabelle shared stories about JB's childhood, his academic achievements, his career ambitions. She spoke about their close relationship with obvious pride and affection. I felt like I was getting a glimpse into the family I was about to join, the life we were about to build together. The French lessons felt like such a perfect surprise waiting in my back pocket. I imagined the moment when I'd reveal my linguistic progress, how delighted they'd both be to discover my dedication to honoring their heritage. I had no idea what was coming. Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. Little inconsistencies in Jean-Baptiste's stories that I dismissed as cultural differences or simple misunderstandings. The way he seemed to know more about American inheritance laws than most foreign nationals. How he always steered conversations away from his own financial situation, while showing intense interest in mine. During those first few months of our engagement, I was so happy I missed the red flags completely. Love has a way of making you willfully blind to uncomfortable truths. Take his apartment, for example. For someone working in international consulting, it was surprisingly modest. Not run down, but definitely basic compared to what his salary should have afforded. When I asked about it, he'd shrug and say he preferred to save money for more important things. "Material possessions are not what matter," he'd tell me, running his fingers through my hair. "Love, family, experiences, these are the only true wealth." It sounded so romantic, so beautifully European in its philosophical simplicity. I admired what I thought was his lack of materialism, especially compared to my ex-boyfriend who'd been obsessed with luxury brands and status symbols. But there were other things, like how he'd grown quiet and distant after I'd casually mentioned the exact amount of my trust fund during a conversation about wedding budgets, or how he'd suddenly become very interested in accompanying me to meetings with my financial advisor, claiming he wanted to understand American investment strategies. "In France, we handle money differently," he'd explained when I questioned his sudden fascination with my portfolio. "I want to learn your systems so I can be a helpful partner." He also started asking strange questions about my family history. Not sentimental questions about my parents or grandparents as people, but specific inquiries about estate planning and inheritance structures. When did I inherit? How was the trust structured? What would happen to the assets if something happened to me? "These are important things for married couples to discuss," he'd reasoned when I expressed confusion about his line of questioning. "In France, we are very practical about financial planning." I bought it completely. After all, he was right that engaged couples should be transparent about finances. I appreciated what seemed like his responsible approach to our future together. Then, there was his reluctance to introduce me to other French people in New York. The city has a sizable French expatriate community, but JB claimed he preferred to keep his professional and personal lives separate. When I suggested we attend a French cultural event or visit the French consulate's public programs, he always had reasons why it wasn't a good idea. "These people are very gossipy," he'd explain. "Too much drama, too many questions. I prefer our privacy." Another thing that should have bothered me. His visa status remained mysteriously vague. Whenever I asked about the details, he'd give complicated explanations about consulting work and international agreements that made my eyes glaze over. I trusted him to handle his own immigration issues, figuring it wasn't my business unless he made it my business. The biggest red flag came 3 weeks before his mother's visit. I'd been looking through his jacket pocket for his phone charger when I found a business card for an immigration attorney. Not unusual for someone on a work visa, right? But when I asked him about it later, he seemed genuinely surprised that I'd found it. "Oh, that," he'd said, recovering quickly. "Just some questions about permanent residency options. Nothing urgent, just planning ahead." He'd kissed my forehead and changed the subject so smoothly that I let it drop. Planning ahead was responsible. I had no reason to be suspicious of a man who was clearly thinking about our long-term future together. Even Marie, my French tutor, had made an offhand comment that stuck with me. During one of our lessons, she'd mentioned that my accent was developing some interesting characteristics. "You are learning very proper French," she'd observed, "but also some colloquialisms that are quite specific to certain regions. Where did you pick these up?" When I told her they came from conversations with Jean-Baptiste, she'd looked thoughtful. "Interesting. Some of these phrases are more common in Paris than Lyon. Perhaps he spent time there for school or work." At the time, I'd just assumed JB had lived in different parts of France throughout his life. It didn't occur to me to question why his linguistic patterns didn't match his supposed hometown. All of these little inconsistencies were swimming around in the back of my mind as we sat in Le Bernardin with his mother. I was so focused on making a good impression that I pushed down any lingering doubts about the man I was planning to marry. The signs were all there. The conversation at Le Bernardin had been flowing beautifully until the moment everything changed. Isabelle had been charming, asking about my work with genuine interest and sharing delightful stories about Jean-Baptiste's childhood. The wine was perfect, the food exceptional, and I felt like I was finally being welcomed into the family I'd been dreaming of joining. That's when their French conversation started. It began innocuously enough. The waiter had just brought our entrees, and there was a natural lull in conversation as we admired the beautiful presentations. Isabelle leaned toward JB and made what sounded like a casual comment about the food. But as their whispered exchange continued, my blood gradually turned cold. "Tu es sûre qu'elle ne comprend pas? Are you sure she doesn't understand?" "Absolument. Elle ne parle que l'anglais. Typiquement américaine." "Absolutely. She only speaks English. Typically American." I kept my expression neutral, continuing to cut my salmon as if I were completely oblivious to their conversation. 5 months of intensive French lessons had prepared me for exactly this moment, though not in the way I'd originally intended. "Le testament est-il en ordre? Is the will in order?" "Pas encore, mais ça viendra après le mariage. Elle me fait entièrement confiance." "Not yet, but that will come after the marriage. She trusts me completely." The fork trembled slightly in my hand, but I forced myself to take another bite, to nod and smile when they looked in my direction. Inside, my heart was racing and my mind was spinning, trying to process what I was hearing. "Et l'héritage de la grand-mère? And the grandmother's inheritance? Plus de 2 millions, plus les propriétés. Elle ne se doute de rien. More than 2 millions, plus the properties. She doesn't suspect anything." Isabelle's laugh was soft and musical, the same laugh that had charmed me all evening. "Mon fils intelligent, tu as bien choisi ta cible. My clever son, you chose your target well." I managed to swallow the bite of food that had turned to ash in my mouth. Target. They'd called me a target. "Combien de temps après le mariage?" "How long after the marriage?" "6 mois, peut-être 1 an. Il faut que ce soit crédible. Puis divorce et on récupère la moitié de tout." 6 months, maybe a year. It has to look credible. Then divorce, and we recover half of everything. "Et si elle résiste?" And if she resists? JB's response made my skin crawl. "Elle ne résistera pas. Elle est trop neuve, trop amoureuse. Les Américaines riches sont si faciles à manipuler. She won't resist. She's too naive, too in love. Rich American women are so easy to manipulate." The room seemed to tilt around me. Every romantic gesture, every sweet word, every moment of apparent vulnerability had been calculated manipulation. The man I'd fallen in love with didn't exist. He was a character JB had created specifically to separate me from my inheritance. "Et après le divorce?" And after the divorce? "Retour en France avec assez d'argent pour ne plus jamais travailler. Mission accomplie. Back to France with enough money to never work again. Mission accomplished." They continued talking, discussing timeline details and strategic considerations with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this before. My hands remained steady as I continued eating, nodding along when they switched back to English to include me in innocuous conversation about the restaurant's decor. But inside, I was falling apart and rebuilding myself simultaneously. The naive, trusting woman who'd walked into this restaurant was dying, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Jean-Baptiste had calculated. "Annie, ma chérie, you are so quiet," Isabel observed, switching back to English with maternal concern. "Is everything all right?" I looked up with my brightest smile, just savoring every moment. "This evening has been absolutely perfect." JB reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "She's just overwhelmed meeting you, Mama. She's been so nervous about making a good impression." "Well, she certainly has," Isabel beamed. "I can see why you fell so completely in love." The irony was suffocating. If only she knew that I was about to fall in love for the first time in my life, not with her son, but with the power of revenge. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal haze. I smiled, laughed, and participated in conversation, while my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with Jean-Baptiste over the past 18 months. How many moments of seeming intimacy had been calculated performances? How many times had he practiced looking at me with fake adoration? When Isabel excused herself to the restroom, JB leaned closer with what I now recognized as completely artificial tenderness. "You're being perfect tonight," he whispered, stroking my hand. "Maman absolutely adores you. This couldn't be going better." I wanted to vomit. Instead, I squeezed his hand back and gave him my most loving smile. "I'm so happy she approves. Family means everything to me." "I know it does. That's one of the things I love most about you." Even that was a lie. He didn't love anything about me except my bank account balance. Isabel returned with fresh lipstick and another round of compliments about what a lovely couple we made. The conversation turned to wedding planning, and she offered to help with any French traditions we might want to incorporate into the ceremony. "Perhaps some French vows," she suggested. "It would be so romantic for Jean-Baptiste to hear his native language on your special day." My heart hammered as JB enthusiastically agreed. "That's a beautiful idea, Maman. Annie would love that, wouldn't you, Sherry?" "Absolutely," I managed. "I'd love to honor your heritage in our ceremony." They had no idea I'd been planning exactly that surprise for months. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. We finished dinner with coffee and shared dessert, Isabel regaling us with stories about French wedding customs, and JB adding details about traditions he wanted to include. They painted such a beautiful picture of our future together, these two people who were actively plotting to destroy me. When we finally left the restaurant, I kissed Isabel goodnight with genuine warmth and thanked her for such a wonderful evening. She hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Welcome to the family, ma petite. You are going to make Jean-Baptiste so happy." The taxi ride back to my apartment was torture. JB held my hand and talked about how perfectly the evening had gone, how much his mother liked me, how excited he was for her to be part of our wedding planning process. "She's going to love helping with all the details," he said. "Maman has excellent taste and such good instincts about people." She certainly did have good instincts. She'd correctly identified me as a naive, wealthy target who could be easily manipulated and discarded. Once we were back in my apartment, JB's phone rang. He answered in French, walking out to the balcony for privacy. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but I caught enough to understand he was talking to someone about timeline and logistics. While he was distracted, I did something I'd never done before in our relationship. I went through his jacket pockets. What I found confirmed my worst fears and gave me information I hadn't expected. The immigration lawyer's business card was still there, but underneath it was a receipt from a private investigator. The invoice was dated 3 weeks before our first date and itemized services for comprehensive background research on one Annie Morrison. They'd investigated me before we'd even met. Our entire relationship had been planned from the very beginning. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. There were also handwritten notes in French detailing my daily routines, my favorite restaurants, my gym schedule, my work patterns. They'd been watching me, studying me, preparing for their approach. But the most damaging evidence was a text message thread I found when his phone lit up with a notification. The conversation was entirely in French, between JB and someone named Marcel. They were discussing my inheritance in explicit detail, including information about the trust structure that I'd never shared with anyone outside my financial advisor's office. Someone had been feeding them inside information about my finances. The conversation included references to photos, and when I scrolled through JB's photo gallery, I found pictures of documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements, investment reports, legal papers. Someone with access to my financial records had been sharing them. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor. One of the people I trusted most in the world was part of this conspiracy. That's when I realized the depth of their betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with crystal clarity about what I needed to do. Jean-Baptiste was still sleeping beside me, looking so peaceful and innocent that for a split second I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Then I remembered his mother's laugh and the word target, and my resolve hardened like steel. I had 3 advantages they didn't know about. First, I spoke French fluently enough to understand their plans. Second, I now had photographic evidence of their conspiracy. Third, and most importantly, they had no idea I knew anything. While JB showered, I forwarded all the photos to a secure email account I created specifically for this purpose. I also made copies on a thumb drive that I hid in my jewelry box. If they were playing a long game, so was I. "Good morning, beautiful," JB said, emerging from the bathroom with that charming smile that used to make my heart skip. Now it just made my skin crawl. "Good morning, handsome. Sleep well?" "Like a baby. Yesterday was perfect. Maman is absolutely smitten with you." I bet she was. Her son had found the perfect mark. "I've been thinking about the wedding," I said, pouring him coffee. "Maybe we should move the timeline up. Why wait 8 months when we could do something sooner?" His eyes lit up with what I now recognized as greed, not romance. "Really? That's a wonderful idea. How much sooner? Maybe 4 months? I know it's rushed, but when you know, right? Absolutely. 4 months would be perfect. Perfect for their timeline, no doubt. Get married quickly, establish legal rights to my assets, then begin phase 2 of their plan. That afternoon, I had lunch with my financial advisor, Robert Chen. I'd been working with him for 3 years, and he'd helped me navigate my inheritance with wisdom and discretion. But sitting across from him now, I studied his face carefully as I brought up my upcoming marriage. "JB seems very interested in understanding American financial systems," I mentioned casually. "He's asked a lot of questions about how marriage affects asset protection." Robert's expression didn't change, but I caught something in his eyes, a flicker of discomfort that confirmed my worst suspicions. "That's natural for an international marriage," he said smoothly. "Different countries have different approaches to marital property. He's particularly curious about the trust structure. I hope I explained it correctly when I told him about the principal and income distributions." Now I was lying, testing him. I'd never discussed those specific details with JB, but Robert nodded as if he already knew about these conversations. "The trust is quite straightforward. Your fiancé seems to have a good grasp of the fundamentals." My heart sank. Robert had been the inside source feeding them information about my finances. Someone I'd trusted completely had been selling me out for months. That's good to hear. I want him to feel comfortable with our financial future. I left that meeting with confirmation that the conspiracy was deeper than I'd imagined. They hadn't just researched me from the outside. They'd infiltrated my inner circle of trusted advisors. That evening, I called Marie to schedule an additional French lesson. "I want to work on more advanced conversation," I told her. "Specifically, I'd like to practice discussing legal and financial topics. In case those subjects come up with JB's family." "Excellent idea. The more sophisticated your vocabulary, the more impressed they will be." If only she knew how sophisticated this was about to get. I spent the next 2 weeks in careful preparation. During the day, I maintained my normal routine, acting like the blissfully ignorant fiancé they expected me to be. I enthusiastically discussed wedding plans with JB, included Isabel in decisions via video calls, and played my role perfectly. But in my spare time, I was building a case. I hired my own private investigator, someone with no connection to my usual professional network. Within a week, I had a complete dossier on Jean-Baptiste Moreau. His real name? As it turned out, Jean-Baptiste Dubois was an identity he'd adopted specifically for this con. The real Jean-Baptiste Moreau had a history. 3 previous engagements to wealthy American women, all of which had ended in expensive divorces that left him significantly richer. He wasn't even French by birth. He was from Quebec, which explained the linguistic inconsistencies Marie had noticed. Isabel wasn't his mother. She was his partner in crime, an actress named Isabelle Tremblay, who specialized in long-term confidence schemes targeting wealthy individuals. They were professionals, and I was their latest job. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you're ready to see how this story unfolds. Armed with the truth about Jean-Baptiste's identity, I began planning my counterattack with the methodical precision of a chess master. Every move had to be calculated, every reaction anticipated. They thought they were playing a naive American girl, but they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong target. First, I needed to protect my assets without alerting them to my knowledge of their plan. I scheduled a meeting with a new financial advisor, someone Robert Chen had never heard of. Under the guise of getting a second opinion for wedding planning, I quietly began restructuring my accounts to limit any potential damage from a future divorce. I want to ensure my grandmother's legacy is protected, I told my new advisor, Sarah Martinez. My fiancé is wonderful, but my grandmother always taught me to be cautious with family wealth. Sarah helped me establish additional trusts and protections that would be nearly impossible for JB to access, even after marriage. To anyone reviewing my finances casually, it would look like standard premarital planning, but I was building a fortress around my inheritance. Meanwhile, I played the role of excited bride-to-be perfectly. I scheduled dress fittings, sent save-the-date cards, and included both JB and Isabel in every decision. They had no idea I was quietly canceling vendors and changing arrangements behind the scenes. "You seem so much happier since we moved up the timeline," JB observed one evening as we reviewed catering options. "I love seeing you this excited about our future." "I can't wait to be your wife," I replied, which was technically true. I couldn't wait for him to find out exactly what kind of wife he was getting. My private investigator, Marcus, provided increasingly damning evidence about their operation. They'd been running this scheme for 5 years, targeting wealthy single women through carefully orchestrated chance meetings. JB would get hired by companies where their research showed he'd have access to high-net-worth individuals. Our meeting hadn't been coincidence. He'd specifically requested assignment to the project where I was the client liaison. "There's more," Marcus told me during one of our discreet meetings. "Robert Chen isn't just providing information. He's actively helping them structure the financial strategy for maximum extraction. He gets 15% of whatever they steal." The betrayal cut deep, but it also clarified my path forward. I wasn't just going to expose Jean-Baptiste's fraud. I was going to destroy their entire operation. I began documenting everything with obsessive detail. Every conversation, every shared document, every financial discussion was recorded or photographed. I installed hidden cameras in my apartment and audio recording devices that could capture their French conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. The evidence I gathered was staggering. They discussed specific amounts they planned to extract, timeline for initiating divorce proceedings, and strategies for manipulating me emotionally during the separation process. They'd even researched my psychological profile to identify my vulnerabilities. "Elle a des problèmes d'abandon depuis la mort de ses parents," I heard Isabelle tell JB during one of their phone calls. "Utilise ça si elle devient difficile." She has abandonment issues since her parents' death. Use that if she becomes difficult. They were planning to weaponize my grief against me. But the most revealing conversation came when they thought I was at work late one evening. I'd actually come home early and heard them talking in my living room through the recording device I'd placed there. "La phase 2 commence quand? When does phase 2 begin?" 3 mois après le mariage. On commence par des disputes sur l'argent. Puis on fait venir des problèmes familiaux de France. Elle va vouloir aider financièrement. 3 months after the marriage. We start with fights about money, then we bring in family problems from France. She'll want to help financially. Et si elle refuse? And if she refuses? On intensifie la pression émotionnelle. Chantage si nécessaire. Elle finira par céder. We intensify the emotional pressure. Blackmail if necessary. She'll eventually give in. They weren't just planning to divorce me. They were planning to psychologically torture me first, extracting as much money as possible before discarding me completely. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to wait for their timeline. I was going to control when and how this confrontation happened. I called my lawyer, someone JB had never met, and scheduled an emergency meeting for the next day. "I need to dissolve an engagement and protect myself from fraud," I told her. "And I need to do it in a way that ensures the perpetrators face criminal consequences." "How much evidence do you have?" "Enough to put them away for a very long time." But I wasn't satisfied with just stopping them. I wanted justice for their previous victims and insurance that they'd never target another woman the way they'd targeted me. The game was about to change completely. My lawyer, Elizabeth Harper, was everything I needed. Sharp, experienced, and completely unconnected to my usual professional circle. When I laid out the evidence I'd gathered, her expression shifted from skeptical to impressed to deeply concerned. "This is far more sophisticated than typical romance fraud," she said, reviewing the photographs and audio recordings. "This is organized crime with multiple victims across several years. We need to involve federal authorities." "Not yet," I said firmly. "I want to catch them in the act first. If we move too early, they'll just disappear and start over somewhere else with new identities." Elizabeth studied me carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" I want to let the wedding proceed, but on my terms. When they make their move, I'll be ready for them. That's extremely dangerous. These people have demonstrated they're willing to use psychological manipulation and potentially blackmail. What if they escalate to physical threats? They won't. I'm too valuable to them undamaged. Besides, I'll have backup plans they don't know about. We spent the next 2 hours crafting a strategy that would give me maximum protection, while allowing JB and Isabel enough rope to hang themselves. Elizabeth would prepare all the legal documents in advance, ready to be filed the moment I gave the signal. A friend of hers in the FBI would be briefed on the situation, prepared to move quickly when we had sufficient evidence for criminal charges. But the most important element was the prenuptial agreement I was going to insist on. Tell Jean-Baptiste that your lawyer requires it for tax purposes, Elizabeth suggested. Make it seem like a bureaucratic necessity rather than a choice. The prenup will protect your assets and give us legal standing if they attempt fraud. That evening, I brought up the prenup during dinner at our favorite restaurant. JB's reaction was everything I'd expected. A prenuptial agreement? He looked genuinely confused. But Sherry, we trust each other completely. Why would we need such a thing? It's not about trust, I explained, playing my role perfectly. My lawyer says it's required because of the trust structure, something about tax implications and estate planning. I don't really understand all the details, but she insists. I watched him process this information, clearly trying to figure out how it would affect their plan. What exactly would this agreement cover? Just standard stuff. Protection of premarital assets, inheritance rights, that sort of thing. Elizabeth says it's routine for anyone with substantial family wealth. I suppose if your lawyer insists, he said slowly. I just don't want anything to suggest we don't trust each other. Of course not. It's purely technical. In fact, having everything clearly defined will make things simpler for us. He agreed, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. That night, I heard him on the phone with Isabel, speaking in rapid French about the unexpected complication. Ça change les plans? Does this change the plans? Pas nécessairement. On adapte la stratégie. Il faut voir les détails du contrat. Not necessarily. We adapt the strategy. We need to see the contract details. They were already planning how to work around the prenup, which would provide additional evidence of their fraudulent intent. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my enthusiastic bride persona, while secretly orchestrating every detail of their downfall. The prenup negotiations gave Elizabeth opportunities to document their attempts to modify terms in ways that would benefit their scheme. Meanwhile, my French lessons with Marie took on new purpose. I practiced legal terminology and formal speech patterns, preparing for the moment when I would reveal my linguistic abilities in the most devastating way possible. Your pronunciation has become quite sophisticated, Marie observed during one lesson. You sound almost native in some phrases. Jean-Baptiste will be amazed. He certainly would be. I also began subtly testing JB's reactions to various scenarios, gauging how he'd respond when his plan eventually unraveled. During casual conversations, I'd mention hypothetical situations about trust and betrayal, watching his facial expressions and body language. I was reading this article about romance scams, I mentioned one evening while we were watching TV. It's terrifying how convincing these con artists can be. Some women never see it coming. Those poor women must feel so foolish afterward, he replied, his tone perfectly sympathetic. To discover that someone you trusted completely was lying to you about everything, it must be devastating. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe, but I just nodded and snuggled closer to him, playing the trusting fiancé he expected me to be. I'm so lucky I found someone genuine, I said. Someone who loves me for who I am, not what I have. Of course, ma chérie. Love is the only thing that matters. 3 weeks before our wedding date, I received the final piece of evidence I needed. Marcus, my private investigator, provided documentation of Robert Chen's involvement, including bank records showing payments from Isabel's accounts. There's something else, Marcus told me. Chen has been setting up accounts in preparation for transferring your assets after the marriage. The infrastructure is already in place. That's when I knew it was time to spring my trap. The final phase of my plan required perfect timing and nerves of steel. I had to let Jean-Baptiste and Isabel believe they were in complete control while actually orchestrating every aspect of their exposure. 3 weeks before our scheduled wedding, I put the final pieces in motion. First, I arranged for my real wedding to be a much smaller affair than they expected. While they prepared for the elaborate celebration we'd been planning, I secretly moved the ceremony to a courthouse with only Elizabeth Harper and 2 witnesses present. The marriage they thought would give them access to my fortune would actually be legally meaningless. Are you sure about this strategy? Elizabeth asked during our final planning meeting. Once you're legally married to him, even with the prenup, you're taking significant risks. That's exactly why we're not going to be legally married, I smiled. The ceremony they're expecting will be purely theatrical. By then, we'll have all the evidence we need for criminal charges. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. A trusting, naive bride who walked straight into their trap. Except the trap would be mine. I scheduled a final dinner with Isabel, ostensibly to go over last-minute wedding details. She arrived at my apartment radiating maternal warmth and excitement about welcoming me into the family. "Ma chérie, you look absolutely radiant," she said, embracing me warmly. "The happiness of young love is so beautiful to see." "I'm so grateful for your support," I replied. "Having you here makes everything feel more special." We settled in my living room with wine and cheese, while my hidden recording devices captured every word of our conversation. Isabel was masterful in her performance, discussing flower arrangements and music choices with genuine enthusiasm. Then she moved to the topics I'd been waiting for. "Jean-Baptiste mentioned you've been having some concerns about financial planning," she said, her tone carefully concerned. "These things can be overwhelming for young people." "A little," I admitted. "My lawyer insisted on this prenuptial agreement, and it's made everything seem so complicated." "Prenups are wise for people with family wealth," Isabel nodded. "But they shouldn't create barriers between spouses. True partners share everything, don't you think?" "That's what I believe, too. JB and I don't have any secrets from each other." Her eyes lit up at this opening. "Speaking of sharing, Jean-Baptiste mentioned you have some family investments that might benefit from European diversification. I have some experience with international finance from my years in banking." This was new information. She'd never mentioned a banking background before. "Really? What kind of banking?" "Private wealth management, primarily for American clients seeking offshore opportunities. The tax advantages can be substantial if structured properly." She was setting up their post-marriage extraction strategy, offering to help me move money offshore where it would be easier for them to steal. "That sounds complicated," I said, playing confused. "Would JB be involved in those decisions?" "Naturally. As your husband, he'd need to be signatory on any international accounts. It's standard practice for married couples." There it was, the confession I needed, captured in high-definition audio. Our conversation continued for another hour, with Isabel gradually introducing more elements of their financial plan. She suggested specific banks, mentioned timelines for transfers, and even provided names of contacts who could facilitate the transactions. By the time she left that evening, I had everything I needed to prove their criminal conspiracy. The next day, JB surprised me with a romantic dinner out, just the two of us. He seemed unusually affectionate, almost nostalgic. "I want you to know how much these past months have meant to me," he said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "Meeting you changed my life in ways I never expected." "Mine too," I replied, which was absolutely true, just not in the way he thought. "After we're married, I want us to be completely open with each other about everything. No secrets, no barriers." "I'd like that too." "Good. Because there might be some changes coming that will require us to make some financial decisions together. Investment opportunities that could secure our future." He was preparing me for their post-marriage phase, just as Isabel had been. They were so confident in their plan that they were already discussing the money extraction openly. "What kind of opportunities?" "International investments. Portfolio diversification, the kind of strategies wealthy families use to protect and grow their assets across generations." The same script Isabel had used, almost word for word. "That sounds wonderful. I trust your judgment completely." JB's smile was radiant with triumph. He thought he'd successfully groomed me for financial manipulation. After dinner, he suggested we take a walk through Central Park, the same place where he'd proposed. As we stood by the Bethesda fountain under the moonlight, he pulled me close and kissed me with what felt like genuine emotion. For a moment, I wondered if any part of his feelings had been real. Then I remembered the word target and steeled myself for what was coming. "1 week until we're married," he whispered against my hair. "I can't wait to start our real life together." Neither could I. The morning of our scheduled wedding, I woke up with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. Jean-Baptiste was already up, pacing nervously around my apartment in his tuxedo. "You seem anxious," I observed, enjoying my coffee while watching him fidget. "Just normal wedding nerves," he replied, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. "Big day, you know?" "The biggest?" I agreed. He had no idea how big. Isabel arrived an hour before we were supposed to leave for the venue. looking elegant in navy blue silk and carrying a small gift box. "For my new daughter," she said, presenting me with a delicate gold bracelet. It belonged to Jean-Baptiste's grandmother. "I want you to have it for your special day." I accepted the bracelet graciously, knowing it was probably stolen from one of their previous victims. Everything about these people was a lie, including their sentimental gestures. "It's beautiful. Thank you for welcoming me into the family. Ma chérie, you are the daughter I never had." The irony was suffocating. As we prepared to leave for the ceremony, I made my final preparations. The recording device in my bouquet was activated. The photographers I'd hired were actually FBI agents. The minister performing the ceremony was Elizabeth Harper in disguise. But Jean-Baptiste and Isabelle had no idea they were walking into an elaborate sting operation. The venue looked exactly as they expected: elegant, expensive, and perfectly arranged for their triumphant moment. About 30 guests were scattered throughout the space, most of them law enforcement officers posing as friends and family. As I walked down the aisle toward JB, I saw him smile with what looked like genuine happiness. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the voice recordings of him laughing about manipulating stupid American women. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Elizabeth performed her role as minister flawlessly, and JB delivered his vows with apparent sincerity. "Annie, you are my heart, my future, my everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love, honor, and protect you for all the days of my life." Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath and began speaking in perfect, fluent French. "Jean-Baptiste, ou devrais-je dire Jean-Baptiste Moreau, j'ai quelque chose à te dire. Jean-Baptiste, or should I say Jean-Baptiste Moreau, I have something to tell you." The color drained from his face instantly. Isabelle gasped audibly from the front row. "J'ai découvert votre plan il y a des semaines. Je sais tout sur vos combines, vos victimes précédentes, et votre intention de me voler mon héritage. I discovered your plan weeks ago. I know everything about your schemes, your previous victims, and your intention to steal my inheritance." JB tried to speak, but I continued relentlessly. "J'ai enregistré toutes vos conversations. J'ai des preuves de votre fraude documentaire, de vos fausses identités, et de la complicité de mon conseiller financier. I've recorded all your conversations. I have evidence of your document fraud, your false identities, and my financial advisor's complicity." Isabelle started to stand up, but found her way blocked by two very large men in suits. "Cette cérémonie n'est pas légale," I continued, "et vous êtes tous les deux en état d'arrestation pour fraude, conspiration, et extorsion. This ceremony isn't legal, and you're both under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and extortion." That's when the FBI agents revealed themselves, and the elegant wedding reception became a crime scene. JB finally found his voice. "Annie, please, let me explain." I cut him off with a smile that felt like justice incarnate. "Oh, darling," I said, switching back to English for the benefit of our audience. "I think you've explained quite enough. In fact, you've explained everything beautifully." The recording equipment picked up every word. The FBI agents moved in, reading them their rights while confused wedding guests whispered among themselves. Isabelle shot me a look of pure venom as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You little—" "Careful," I interrupted. "Everything you say now can and will be used against you in court. Though honestly, we already have more than enough evidence to put you both away for a very long time." As they were led away, JB turned back to me one last time. "How long have you known?" I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin, feeling more powerful than I ever had in my life. "Since the moment your mother called me a target in French at Le Bernardin. You should have done your research more carefully. I've been taking French lessons for 5 months. His face crumpled in defeat as the full scope of his miscalculation hit him. "Bon voyage, Jean-Baptiste. I bet immigration will be very interested to meet you." 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Jean-Baptiste Moreau and Isabelle Tremblay receive their sentences. 15 years for him, 12 for her, plus restitution to their previous victims totaling over $3 million. Robert Chen had flipped early in the investigation, providing evidence about other financial advisors involved in similar schemes in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation helped the FBI identify and arrest an entire network of romance fraud specialists targeting wealthy women across the country. "How does it feel?" Elizabeth Harper asked as we left the courthouse together. "Like justice," I replied, though honestly, I'm more proud of what we accomplished for their other victims. The investigation had identified 7 other women who'd been defrauded by JB and Isabelle over the past 5 years. With the evidence I'd gathered, authorities were able to recover significant assets and provide compensation through the criminal restitution process. 3 of those women had reached out to me personally, expressing gratitude for finally getting validation and closure. One of them, Margaret, had been so devastated by the experience that she'd become reclusive and mistrustful of everyone. Learning that she wasn't the only victim and that her instincts about something being wrong had been correct helped her begin healing. "I thought I was going crazy," she told me during one of our coffee meetings. "Everyone kept telling me I was being paranoid, that I should be grateful someone loved me. But you proved that our instincts were right." That conversation meant more to me than any personal satisfaction from seeing JB and Isabel imprisoned. My life had changed completely in the months since the fake wedding. I'd left my marketing job and started a nonprofit organization focused on educating people about romance fraud and providing support for victims. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling in ways my corporate career had never been. I'd also begun speaking at financial advisor conferences about the warning signs of client manipulation and the importance of ethical oversight. The scandal involving Robert Chen had prompted industry-wide discussions about protecting vulnerable clients from internal threats. "You've become something of a legend," Sarah Martinez, my new financial advisor, had told me. "I've heard your story referenced in compliance training across the industry." Personally, I was still rebuilding my ability to trust people. The betrayal by Robert Chen, someone I'd considered almost family, had been as devastating as JB's deception. But therapy was helping me understand the difference between healthy caution and paranoid isolation. I'd started dating again, slowly and carefully. Nothing serious yet, but I was learning to enjoy companionship without immediately wondering about ulterior motives. The experience with JB had made me wiser about red flags, but it hadn't destroyed my capacity for hope. Marie, my French tutor, had become a close friend. When I told her the full story of how her lessons had saved me from fraud, she'd been shocked and proud. "Your dedication to learning was remarkable," she'd said. "But your courage in using that knowledge to protect yourself and others, that was extraordinary." The media attention from the case had been intense, but ultimately positive. Several journalists had written thoughtful pieces about the sophistication of modern romance fraud and the importance of financial literacy for protection. My story had prompted legislative discussions about stronger penalties for organized fraud schemes. But the most meaningful outcome was personal transformation. The naive, trusting woman who'd walked into Le Bernardin that night was gone, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and more purposeful. Standing in my apartment now, looking out at the city skyline, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The view was the same, but everything else was different. I was different. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, one of JB's previous victims who'd become a close friend. "Dinner tomorrow to celebrate the sentencing? My treat this time." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. And this time, I'll pick the restaurant." Some people might think revenge is a dish best served cold, but I'd learned it's actually best served with justice, healing for all victims, and the satisfaction of knowing you've prevented future harm. The girl who'd fallen for a French accent and romantic gestures was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that real love doesn't require you to be naive, that trust should be earned gradually, and that the most attractive quality in a partner isn't charm, it's integrity. I'd learned to listen not just to what people say, but to what they reveal when they think no one is paying attention. I'd discovered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the willingness to walk away from anything that doesn't honor your worth. Most importantly, I'd learned that being deceived doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you human. What matters is how you respond when you discover the truth. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of overcoming betrayal and finding strength. And remember, trust your instincts, protect your assets, and never be afraid to verify what people tell you about themselves. Your intuition is often right, even when everyone else tells you you're being paranoid. Sometimes the most romantic thing you can do is hire a private investigator,